And we are live, but I'm showing screen. I got to do. We are. All right. Are we good? Jesus. Jesus isn't here, is he? Greetings all, online, offline, inline, underlined, highlighted, all those things. As you all know, I am Rick Levine, and we are here at Soul Food Coffee House for a technically premature March Astrology Night, because I will be lecturing in Orlando next Friday night. And so we kind of shifted gears. And I expected 3 people to be here, but considering it's a unscheduled or lately scheduled, pre-scheduled, I don't know. Nice to see so many faces. Anyhow, it is Friday evening, February 28th, and we are streaming live. Sam, is there a way to tell how many people are on with us on YouTube?
There is it says 190 on StreamYard.
Okay, so we got a couple hundred people that may grow, but actually last month, I think the Astrology Night live afterwards reached about 6,000 or 7,000 people. So we get some, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'll stop rambling. Well, no, I won't. I'm going to ramble for an hour because that's what I get paid to do. Unfortunately, I don't get paid for this, but that's why I get to ramble. Anyhow, we are here on the ultimate day of February. Tomorrow is March 1st. And for many of you, some of you may have already seen my February forecast, which is live on YouTube as of today. Normally that goes live on the 1st of the month, but because this was early, I wanted to get that up also. And so I'm not going to cover the same material I cover there, where I do a day by day for the entire month. But I do want to talk tonight a little bit about these strange retrogrades and why my February forecast was titled like hamsters running in wheels. Because if some of you remember the February forecast, it was a hall of mirrors. And quite frankly, we're still in that hall of mirrors, except we're running around in circles harder and faster. And some of us are totally discouraged and have just decided to stop running, but we're still in the wheels and we're still going around. And although I think in talking with my editor earlier today, going over the text that I write each month for this, Gail said, gee, for a feisty, fiery Aries, you sure were low key this month, because apparently she listened to a number of other astrologers today talking about what a disaster or how awful March will be and how we have to get through March in order to even talk about April, May, or June. And all of those may be true, but my take is a bit different. And I admittedly am a bit of an astrological minimalist. Every month, the new moon or full moon or retrograde Mercury or whatever it is the most extraordinary thing that ever happened. It's the worst thing ever. It's the most incredible thing ever. And you know what? Those damn planets just keep going round. And so I do tend to be a bit minimalistic, or reductionist isn't the right word, but a bit calloused at these kind of overinflated apocalyptic, I can't even say it, apocalyptic forecasts every month. And yet, on the other hand, it's really important to acknowledge that these are pretty strange. I think that's a euphemism. A euphemism is saying something that's horrible in a nicer way, isn't it? These are pretty strange times. And so I'm not looking to step around that issue at all, but I do think that one of the best images that I've come across so far was on a short little podcast that I did watch yesterday from my good friend Sam Reynolds. I don't know if any of you know Sam's work, but the title of his little thing about March was called Chutes and Ladders. And there's this sense of like, we think we're moving around a board linearly or running around that hamster wheel linearly, and we take a step and all of a sudden we're in another time space dimension completely different from where we thought we were. In other words, those chutes and ladders are making it so that the linear progression of time is not as linear or as progressive as we think it is. And so kudos to Sam. It's a great image. I wish I thought of it, but I'm happy to pass along his sense of reality, because I concur. Now, what happens in astrology often is that we pick out a particular event or a particular planetary movement, and we talk about it. We do the same with a chart. Oh, look at this chart. This person has the sun square Saturn. Therefore, this person may have problems with Saturn authority, may need to work harder. We take these out of what we call astrological cookbooks, and we particularize and isolate individual planets and signs, or planets and houses, or planets aspecting another planet. What I try to do is to step back a little bit and realize that the planets are always in motion. And I've used this analogy before. Is it an analogy or a metaphor? It's an analogy. Although there's this guy online named Dr. Marty Grothe. Does anybody know this guy? He does a weekly. I've been watching his weeklies or reading his weekly email for, 10 years or more. And he's a collector of quotes and of interesting linguistic things. And one of his several books is I Never Met a Four I Didn't Like. But I think this is an analogy. Maybe it's a metaphor. I'm not even sure. Anyhow, you're standing in the ocean, and the tide is going out, and yet a strong wave comes in and knocks you over because of the force of the incoming wave. You can stand in the water when the tide is changing for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes and still not be sure whether the tide is going out or coming in. Because in the ocean, there are currents within currents within currents, or waves within waves, or cycles within cycles. And this is really what I'm going to try to drive home this evening, is the fact that right now, and when I say right now, I mean on Friday evening, February 28th, and I also mean February and March of 2025, and I also mean the early 2020s, and I also mean the latter part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. These are all various versions of now. And what the point I'm trying to make is that now it's really difficult to get a take on whether the tide is coming in or out, because there's so much being stirred up, and there's so many important cycles within cycles within cycles. And I think that March is a key point in this whole process, where there's so much mud being stirred up by the dynamic changing tide, and yet we can't tell which direction the ultimate tide is going in. And that's a source of heightened frustration, uncertainty, confusion, discouragement, excitement. I mean, it depends. You have to realize that for every person who looks at something one way. There's someone, and I'm not saying there's the same numbers, but there are people that look at things the other way. And as an astrologer, although I certainly do have opinions that obviously will come through, I always try to understand that we're looking at events from a cosmic perspective here, and that the cosmic perspective does not see good or bad the way we do. When Jeff Jower, and I used to teach together, and for those of you who are, how many are here for a first or second time, just kind of new? Okay, well, welcome to our dysfunctional family. Jeff and I were astrology partners for the work that we did, and we began doing Astrology Night here, I think about 15 years ago. I may be off a year or two. Jeff passed away. It was actually longer ago than that, because Jeff passed away about 10 years ago now, just this month. Sorry, my mind just went on a whole run of things of standing on stage here so many times with Jeff. But Jeff used to say that this good bad thing is really kind of a misnomer, because we say that we look at a certain transit or a certain astrological configuration and we go, that's good. For example, you're heading to the beach and the sun's out, and that's a good astrology transit because you got your suntan lotion and your bathing suit and your towel, and that's a good day. But for a duck, that day sucks because there's so many damn humans on the beach. The duck's good day is a day when it's overcast and cool and rainy because the beach is theirs. And so we have to be careful about making these good, bad judgments, even though it may feel very good or very bad from an individual perspective. What makes this more complicated is that there are certain planets that increase confusion. And the word confusion is one of those words that is problematic, like many words in the English language, because we interpret it differently than what it means. The word confusion comes from Greek, and con is not like our president, but con is, but con actually means with, like the same as, like a conjunction. It is two planets that come together. And so a confusion, what does the word fusion mean? Come on.
Mix, to combine.
Yeah, it's two things that melt or merge together. And so confusion actually means two things melting or merging together as one. Now that's fine, except the ego don't like that shit. And the reason is that the ego's job, we think, oh, ego, terrible. All these spiritual traditions are about getting over our ego. Oh, that person has such a big ego. And we have this negative connotation around the word ego. But ego is actually when you say, I feel this, I am that, I need to pay my rent, I have anything that begins with an I is basically the ego expressing its identity, its self that is separate from all the other selves out there. This is what the ego's job in Freudian psychology is, survival. And that it's the ego that basically figures out what it needs to do to have a roof over its head and to have a next meal and to have safety and security and not be hungry and all of those things that we here in this room are privileged because we do have most of those things, if not under control, at least under emergency crisis management. The problem is that when ego is dissolved, I lose perspective of the boundary between me and you. And so boundaries are important. In astrology, the sun creates boundaries because it casts shadows. And the sun, when you say, what's your sign, which really means what is your sun sign, you're talking about that part of you that creates boundary, that is objective reality. When the sun is up, we can see things, we can make maps, we can give directions, go down to that building, make a right-hand turn, go 100 feet, and then you'll see that. In other words, there's actual movement through a three-dimensional world that has boundaries. When there's no sun, then subjectivity takes over objectivity, and we often attribute this to the moon. And at night, when we're sleeping, there are no boundaries. We're walking along and all of a sudden we're on a beach, and then a whale comes out of the water, turns into a snake, and we're then driving a bus with the snake on the seat next to us. And in a dream, we don't think anything about this because there are no boundaries. And so the moon, or feeling, subjectivity, does not have the boundaries that the ego does. So there are many spiritual traditions that have to do with getting over that illusion. I say illusion as another Freudian word because we like to think an illusion is something that's bad because it's wrong. An illusion is not something that's wrong. It's just something that is not yet real. Because, to quote Walt Disney or some Disney writer, a dream is a wish your heart makes, and dreams can come true. In fact, William Blake wrote in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, what is now proved was once only imagined. So here we go into what's going on now, because the planet that is most associated with the dissolution of real boundaries, of reality as we think reality should be, the three-dimensional world of things. The planet that's associated with the dissolution of that world is Neptune. Good job. Because Neptune, as the god, well, that was from a patriarchy, we could say the god or goddess of the seas, the oceans, but not just the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, the seas of consciousness from which everything comes and becomes crystallized or three-dimensional and eventually melts back into the seas of consciousness. This is Neptune's realm. Neptune is the planet that is associated with dreams, with illusions, with imagination. My friend Caroline Casey, if you don't know Caroline's work, YouTube search her because she's really quite a speaker, a good astrologer. And she says that imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. Great quote. I say that Neptune, which is the planet of dreams and imagination, creates the framework or the invisible scaffolding upon which Saturn builds three-dimensional reality. So the idea of saying, oh, that's just an illusion is something that the ego likes to do because the ego needs to maintain this illusion of separateness. And whenever I do this little bit of talk, which I've done from different directions many times, I always think of the Beatles singing, I am you as you are me, as we are all together. Goo goo gajoob. But there's this idea that there are certain practices and substances that dissolve ego, and a lot of the Eastern traditions and metaphysical spiritual traditions have to do with breaking through the ego. Now, here's the problem. For the last 14 years, Neptune, the planet of dreams, illusions, imagination, delusion, and when Neptune was discovered in the 1800s, it was considered to be the worst thing ever. Matter of fact, astrologers looked up at Neptune and said, this is the planet of deception, psychosis, deception. There's another word I'm looking for. Someone help me.
Disassociation.
Huh?
Disassociation.
Disassociation, psychosis, mental illness. It's the planet that has to do with when you mislead someone. There's a word there.
Deceit.
Thank you. Deception. That Neptune is the planet of deception because it makes us see things that are not there, or see things that are there in ways that are not necessarily based on reality. And it's not always negative, because we can see something and see something that's incredibly beautiful. We can fall in love. We can, in fact, infatuation is certainly a Neptunian influence, but so is the idea of a dreamer coming up with some idea that's never been manifest, and then manifesting it. So Neptune can have incredibly creative, inspirational, and spiritual roles also. The problem is that every planet is at home in a different sign, and Jupiter, the planet of making things bigger than they really are, traditionally has been at home in Pisces. But when Neptune was discovered, it was decided by astrologers observing that Neptune was really at home in Pisces, because Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac, remember, the zodiac is just how we astrologers count from 1 to 12. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Aquarius, Pisces. And when you hit 12, then you go back to Aries. It's a cycle or a circle, and those two words are interchangeable. And the imagery of the sign of Neptune, do we have any Neptunians here? Do we have any, by a Neptunian, someone with strong Neptune influence in their chart? You know, you drug addicts, don't be shy. Well, because Neptune is often associated with any form of addiction, whether it's positive or negative, and one can be addicted to beauty, like many of the great poets and artists over the centuries have been, and they've left us with magical artifacts based upon their Neptunian addictions or attractions or obsessions. Neptune can also be the planet of obsessions also. But what about Pisces? Do you have any Pisces people here? How about Pisces rising, or Pisces moon, or anything in Pisces, a friend in Pisces, a bottle of gin in Pisces, a stellium in Pisces. A stellium, for those of you uninitiated, is simply 3 or more planets that are clustered together in a particular sign. So the problem is, I'm still on that second or third sentence. I keep coming back to the problem is, and I don't state what it is. The problem is that for the last 14 years, Neptune has been at home in Pisces, where the planet of dreams and imagination and illusion, the planet whose only job is to dissolve the illusion of the three-dimensional world, in Pisces has been on steroids. Because it's been so overamped and so overactive, because it's stronger in Pisces, because it's like a king in his castle or a queen in her castle. And so Neptune takes about 165 years to go all the way around from Aries to Pisces and then back to Aries again. The last time that Neptune moved from the sign of Pisces, where it was for about 14 years, because 14 times 12 comes out to about 165. And if someone has a calculator on their phone, you can tell me how many numbers I am off here, but it's close, because Neptune spends about 14 years in each sign. The last time that Neptune left its 14 years in Pisces and entered Aries was on April 13th, 1861. Now, Pisces is dreams, illusion, it's confusion. See, when I'm confused, I don't know what's real. I don't know where I end and where you begin. I don't know where truth ends and fake truth begins. It's just harder to get a handle or a sense of clarity. The upside is, when it comes to spirituality, creativity, imagination, dreams, illusions, that stuff's all, all hyper. But Neptune is on March 30th, moving from 14 years in dreamy Pisces into Aries, which is the first sign of the zodiac, which is where the energy begins. Aries is the sign that has to do with Mars. It has to do with creating boundary. It has to do with a strong yang energy. It's the seed busting out of its shell. And at the Aries point, you can see a seed and you can see the tip of that green or that energy protruding out like the arrow on the symbol of Mars, the circle with an arrow on it that's often considered to be the male sign or the male symbol. That at that moment, you can't tell whether that seed is is going to grow into a piece of grass, a blade of grass, a dandelion, or an oak tree, because all energy begins from concentrated seed and that first impulse forward. That's what Aries is all about. Mars is considered to be at home in Aries, and Mars has to do with conflict, with engagement, with fighting for survival. Mars is the planet of anger and boundary and assertion. And of course, too much assertion becomes aggression. And so Mars itself is tied to the sign of Aries. So we have on March 30th, for the first time since April 13th, 1861, Mars moving from dreamy Pisces into forceful Aries. Does anybody know what happened? And maybe you read my thing already online today, because on April 12th, 1861, within 1 day of Neptune moving from Pisces into Aries, was when the American Civil War started. That was the first fight, the first battle, which the Union lost terribly. But that was the beginning of that 14-year period that included several years of actual fighting and then a decade of rebuilding what it was that was lost during the beginning of that transition. This is where we are at. That doesn't mean we're going to have a civil war, although there are many people who already can see that we've been in a civil war, and maybe that will continue, except now, instead of having North against South, we have different belief structures fighting against what is real. And make no mistake about it, the war that is going on right now is, if there are guns and bombs and horrific destruction, as there are in many hotspots around the planet, the real war is over the control of what reality, of how reality is defined. That's what's going on. And trying to understand what's going on right now, we really need to have a deep understanding of the transition from, this is going to sound like coming from left field, the transition from death to reincarnation. Because the end of any cycle has an end. We call it death if it's the cycle of our own individual egoic life. And then something happens that we don't understand. And then somehow the cycles continue on, whether you believe in reincarnation. Actually, you can't believe in reincarnation unless you understand disincarnation, which we call death. And I know many of you have heard me quote William Blake, who wanted on his gravestone, William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. It's a constant cycle between endings and beginnings, because we're back to the tides ebbing and flowing, rising and falling again and again and again. But when planets move from that last degree of Pisces to the first degree of Aries, it's kind of like a cosmic reset. In fact, every year on the first moment of spring, the vernal equinox in the northern hemisphere, that is timed to when that is what we astrologers call the zero Aries point. In other words, the entire astrological zodiac is based upon the starting point of a circle that has no starting point, but we use that starting point. And, until the 13, 14, 1500s, the new year began on the spring equinox. It was only the Romans that basically introduced, for tax purposes, the idea of having Capricorn being the beginning of a year, and the Saturnalia, which was this crazy period of time that we now celebrate as the Christmas holidays or the Christmas New Year's. But the point is that there's something that happens as the sun moves from the end of last year's cycle into the beginning of the new year cycle around the beginning of spring, because those things that appeared to be beautiful and in perfect balance 6 months prior, when the sun was in Libra, when everything was in balance. And, Libra is the only sign of the zodiac that's not represented by a living creature. In fact, the word zodiac comes from a Greek word, zooidion, which means zoo or menagerie. The word zoo comes from zodiac. And yet Libra is the halfway point that has to do with this pendulum going backwards and forwards. The beginning of the season, creation, new season, we reach halfway, and then everything stops and reverses. And that perfect autumn day when everything just feels in balance, and especially in the Northeast, but here a little bit, the colors are just right. Everything is like magical and almost like suspended in time. That point is actually a point on the zodiac that is exactly opposite the 0 degrees Aries point, which many branches of astrology use as if it was a planet. That's how important it is. They say, for those of you who are geeky and want to know this, the Uranian school of astrology, or the Hamburg school that began in the early 1900s in Germany, cosmobiology and Uranian astrology. Someone will, if you study that, someone will say, so where's Aries in where's the Aries point in your chart? That 0 degree point is that significant. The sun reaches it once every year, and that's the first moment of spring. Neptune reaches it once every 165 years. And because of this apparent backwards and forward movement of the planets that we call retrograde, what's going to happen is that Neptune will tip into Aries on March 30th. And then it'll retrograde back. I don't have the dates, I have the dates here. But late summer, is it in October? Does someone know this? Huh? I'll tell you in a second. I have one too many sheets of paper. Neptune turns retrograde in July, and then backs into, I know I had this somewhere. I've never had so many damn pieces of paper. There it is. Neptune backs into Pisces on September 1st. And then next year on January 26th, it moves back into Aries, where it then stays for 14 years. Now, some of you will realize or remember that over the last couple of years, Pluto has done the same little dance as it tipped after spending 15, 16 years in Capricorn. It then tipped into Aquarius and then moved back into Capricorn, tipped into Aquarius again, back into Capricorn for a moment, and now it's in Aquarius for about 20 years. So these slow-moving planets none of the planets move backwards, but they look like it because the Earth is going around separate from those planets. And when they get close together, we have this phenomenon we call retrograde motion. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But all the real planets, I go real planets because we astrologers use the word planet like the Greeks. If it moves up there, it's a planet, meaning the sun and moon are planets. We know better, or we know the modern definition. But all the real planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and about 250,000 other objects that NASA tracks going around the sun, including some 30 or 40,000 asteroids and about 5,000 or 6,000 Kuiper belt objects and all these other things that you might consider just to be gravel. But, if everything is connected to everything, well, then everything is important. So we're at this point where Neptune at the end of March touches into Aries, but it doesn't stay there very long. It goes back into Pisces, almost like remedial work. We got to still figure out this whole fake whatever it is and what's real, what's not real, before it moves back into Aries next January. Now, separate from that, we have Saturn, the planet of reality. At least that's what Saturn has always been called. Some of you may have heard me quote Rob Hand, who I call the academic dean of astrology on planet Earth. He's the guy, most astrologers have 1 or 2 or 5 books by Rob as the classic modern, workbooks of practical astrology. Probably 40 years ago, Rob wrote a book called Essays on Astrology. And in it, he said that we astrologers used to believe that Saturn was reality and Neptune was illusion. That's what we've just been talking about, right? He goes, however, we now have learned that Neptune is reality and Saturn's the illusion there was one. Really important to understand this. You see, part of the larger shift that we are going through right now on planet Earth is, and you won't read about this in the paper or in any books, but there are numbers of people who are talking about this. And the concept is that as a species, we are on this 200-year run that probably has another 100 years or so in front of it as we move from physical to metaphysical. And I use the word metaphysical without reference to any modern corporations. But we are moving from physical to metaphysical. I mean, 100 years ago, if you would say, is everyone here? That would mean, is everyone here? Now you can sign on to a Zoom meeting and go, well, is everyone here? Well, let's see. Bob is here from Melbourne. Susie's here from Brussels. Frank's here from Buenos Aires, and I'm here from Toronto. Yeah, I guess everyone's here. Here and now. When's now? Well, it's 7 p.m. on Friday evening here and now. But it's already March 1st, mid-morning in Eastern Europe, or early morning, and it's already midday tomorrow in Melbourne. So this concept of what is real has disintegrated in front of our eyes, and it's part of the confusion, the with melting that we have as we begin to realize that the hard-edged crystalline boundaries of Saturn are not what we thought they were. Now, coming closer into here and now, wherever the hell here is and whenever the hell now is, we have not only Neptune at the very, very last degree, it's at the ultimate degree of Pisces, meaning it's within 1 degree of changing in its 165-year cycle from beginning to ending and starting a new beginning. And it's going to be a full year of it going back and forth. So we're not quite done with this transition. On top of that, we have Saturn, the planet of reality or illusion that there is a 3-dimensional reality, also moving through Pisces. But Saturn only takes 30 years, 29 and a half years to go around. And so we get Saturn in Pisces for a couple of 2.5 years, every 3 decades. The problem with Saturn in Pisces is Saturn wants condensation, constriction, crystallization. Saturn pulls energy in and makes it seem solid. Don't hit your computer, Rick. Makes it seem real. But in Pisces, even what's real doesn't seem real. So Saturn in Pisces is kind of a complex thing. And in fact, one could say that Saturn in Pisces in some ways is the symbolism of Christianity. I know it's more complicated than that, but Christianity is built upon the 90-degree angle, which in astrology is Saturnian. It's the cross of the material universe. You know, in a way, each and every one of us are nailed to the cardinal cross in astrology being the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, and bottom of the heavens, these 4 points. And in a way, we all bear our own cross, having to survive in the three-dimensional world. Saturn has been in Pisces for about 1.5 years now. I think it first moved into Pisces actually almost 2 years ago in March of 2023. Saturn moved into Pisces in March of 2023. Saturn moves faster than Neptune, and Saturn right now is catching up to Neptune, as it does every 45 years or so, 40 years or so. They do that this summer, almost. And almost is a key word here, because remember, Neptune is moving from Pisces into Aries on March 30th. Saturn moves from Pisces to Aries in May, I believe. Again, I got to go back to my magic little cheat sheet here. Saturn moves into Aries, May 24th. And it almost catches up to Neptune. It comes within that close. Less than about 1/4 of a degree. And then they both turn retrograde. But Saturn turns retrograde and moves faster than Neptune. So Saturn backs up into Pisces, Neptune backs up into Pisces. Then they both turn direct, and then they actually catch up next February at 0 degrees of Aries. Now, we astrologers love to go back on the computer and go back into history and say, well, when did this happen last time? You know, we know that the last time that Neptune moved from Pisces into Aries was the beginning of the Civil War. So when was the last time that Saturn and Neptune moved from Pisces into Aries together and then joined up exactly at 0 degrees of Aries, the starting point of the zodiac? And the answer is never. Well, never within the ability of computers to not lose the accuracy of calculation and validation. Most of us that have done this research have agree that going back about 4,000 years or so, it's never happened before. So what does this mean? I don't have a fucking clue. However, there's more going on than that, because this month we have other things that are happening that are also significant. And one of them comes back to what I called earlier, Sam Reynolds' concept of chutes and ladders. Because all planets turn retrograde. The outer planets turn retrograde once a year when the Earth comes between that planet and the sun. Because the Earth is going around, and when the Earth gets nearer to any planet, let's say Neptune, they come closest together when they're on the same side of the sun. And it looks like that planet's going backwards, but it's just an optical illusion. And the best way to understand this optical illusion is hold your finger out like this and go back and forth with your eyes, and then move it closer and see how the distance, and then take something that's farther away and do it, and gee, it hardly moves at all. The closer things get to you, the more this retrograde motion occurs. All the outer planets do it about once a year for 4 or 5 months. Mercury and Venus, because they're inside the orbit of Earth, do it more often. In fact, Mercury turns retrograde about 3 times every year for about 3 weeks. Venus turns retrograde about every year and a half for, think about this number, 40 days. Seems to be an important number in a variety of spiritual traditions. And Mars turns retrograde for about 7 weeks, and it does it once every 2 years. About just a little bit less than that. So these inner planets, when they do it, are more noticeable because it's like they're moving faster. The brakes screech and then they're moving backwards, and you can almost feel the whiplash from how they change. In fact, Mercury moves faster than any of the other real planets, and that's the one whose retrograde we most can see. I mean, when it stations, stations means it holds still. Just like a pendulum moves fastest halfway through its cycle, and as it reaches either side, it slows down, it stops, and then it moves slowly and speeds up, fastest motion, slows down and stops. And when planets station, they hold an enormous amount of power when they change direction. And again, they don't change direction, they change directions perceptually. So Mars has been retrograde, and again, I can do these dates kind of almost, but if I look at my cheat sheet, I won't mess up. Yeah, Mars entered Cancer last September, and just like, excuse me, just like Mars likes being in Aries because it's at home, like Jupiter and Neptune like being in Pisces because they're at home. Planets have signs they don't like being in. At least that's the traditional astrological lore. I'm not sure that it always works that way. But Mars doesn't like being in Cancer because Cancer is caring and nurturing, and Cancer is receptive and can even be passive. Think of mothering is a Cancerian energy. It's creating a hard outer shell around those you love, rather than going out and beating up people who, have less than you to take what they have. And unfortunately, in a patriarchal society, a functional Mars has to do with being able to go to war and winning, whereas Mars in Cancer is a bit more passive and even passive aggressive. Mars has been in Cancer since last September. And Mars actually turned retrograde back at the beginning of December of 2024. Mars turned direct just a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually less than a week ago, on February 24th, Mars turned direct. And so Mars is now moving forward, except because a planet, as it changes directions, moves very slowly. When Mars is moving quickly, it moves through an entire sign in 2 months. Right now, Mars, for the month of March, only moves like 4 or 5 degrees, 5 degrees, I think, for the whole month. I have that noted here also somewhere in my copious too many notes that I used for my, there it is. Mars moves 6 degrees for the entire month of March. And so Mars is not moving very fast right now. And it's moving in a sign that's holding its energy in. And what's really weird about all of this is we have Venus and Mercury, which are both moving back and forth from Pisces to Aries, retrograding back into Pisces, and then moving back forward into Aries again. Remember, this is the dance that I started talking about at the very beginning, with Neptune just touching into Aries by the end of the month. And what this means is that we are now at a point where first Venus lined up with Neptune and then moved into Aries. And on March 1st, Venus turns retrograde, and it will back up and move from Aries back into Pisces as it goes over Neptune again, increasing this whole where the hell am I, when the hell am I feeling. And then it'll turn direct and then go across that the third and final time. Meanwhile, Mercury is already slowing down because Mercury turns retrograde. Mercury is direct, has been moving direct, but Mercury turns retrograde on March 14th and then doesn't turn direct until early April. But what that means is that Mercury also has, over these last few days even and weeks, has moved over Neptune into Aries, touches into Aries. In fact, Mercury actually is doing that literally right now. Mercury enters Aries on Monday, Tuesday. It moves into Aries. It lines up with Neptune. It lines up with Neptune on March 2nd, moves into Aries on March 3rd, and gets a fair way into Aries, about 10 degrees into Aries, and then it turns retrograde and goes back all over it again and back into Pisces. So at the beginning, on the first day of March, Mercury was at the next to last degree of Pisces, at about 28 degrees of Pisces. On the 1st of April, Mercury is at 29 degrees of Pisces, only 1 degree away, having moved forward 10 degrees and backward 10 degrees. In other words, Mercury, the planet of communication, of mental, of intellectual, of thought, Mercury, over the course of the month, although it does move forward and backwards, over the course of the month, it doesn't get anywhere. Hamsters and wheels. Meanwhile, Venus, which begins the month already in Aries, it moved into Aries a couple of weeks ago. By the end of the month, it's back at 28 degrees of Pisces, which is exactly where Mercury is right now. And so it's almost like a relay race where they're passing the baton from one to the other, except as they're passing it, the other person's running the wrong way. This is coming back to Sam's brilliant concept of chutes and ladders. It's like time is like warped, and we look at an event and it feels like there's a lot going on. It feels like the mud's being stirred up by all the currents, and it is. But it's an illusion to think that we know what the longer trajectory is. And this is why it's so important to have this perspective on the month, because it's easy to get disillusioned and then discouraged. Although, and many of you have heard me say this before, being disillusioned is really good. Being discouraged is not. Why is disillusioned really good? Well, because illusions are our dreams. And when we work hard, Saturn, we can make our dreams come true. But when our dreams come true, they're most often never quite as colorful, beautiful, pleasurable, easy as they were when they were dreams. But that is disillusionment, because the illusion becomes real. And it's important to go through life disillusioning yourself, because it's important not to hold some dreams as reality, because that in itself is problematic. However, being disillusioned often leads to discouragement. And although disillusionment is good because we're dealing with what's real, look at what's happening out there in the world. And if you're not disillusioned, you're probably mentally troubled or incapable, because although you might find pockets of things that are good, things are not necessarily the way anyone, I don't care what your beliefs are, religious, spiritual, political. I mean, it's if you're not disillusioned about some things, you're in denial. However, being discouraged is something else, because the word courage comes from the Latin cur, I think the French, does anyone here speak French? How do you say heart? There you go. Being discouraged means losing heart. Do you understand the difference between disillusionment and discouragement? And so it's really important for us to acknowledge and honor our disillusionment and yet not fall into the trap of being lost in some dark, deep rabbit hole, feeling like we are victims and therefore we lose heart. So, what are we doing time-wise? We're good. Yeah, you know, the thing about the other thing about retrogrades, I said I would come back and I'll say a few words about retrogrades in general and specifically. Again, every planet goes retrograde. If you go back a few hundred years or a few thousand years, which is where astrology, modern astrology, got its legs, wings. I don't know, just whatever. The foundation of modern astrology goes back, you know, to the Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Chaldean, Greek periods of time. And in those days, there was not the same level. We moderners forget that even 200, even 150 years ago, there was no word for unconscious. There was no word for egos. There was no word for projection. There was no spiritual, you know, paths that people went on to find themselves and to, you know, to have human growth or, you know, these are all modern concepts that you go back a couple of centuries or a millennium or two ago. And basically, as a human, you just did whatever you needed to do to live another day, to know that you had food and water and a roof over your head and that you could survive. Retrograde planets traditionally in astrology are considered negative. They're considered to be problems. And if you go back in time, it's easy to understand why. And although there are many modern astrologers who practice varieties of Hellenistic Greek, ancient Greek astrology, I find some of those concepts incredibly important to understand and also incredibly out of touch with the world in which we live. And I'll give you the best example I can using Mercury as an example, only because Mercury is the one that we can understand the most. So I view planets basically as broadcast stations. You know, we are each cosmic transceivers receiving broadcasts from the universe, from the cosmos, and integrating them, manifesting, and then rebroadcasting or projecting and creating vibrations in our lives that unfold as the patterns that we live, which is why working with a horoscope is so accurate, why it actually works. Now, anyone who's worked with an older radio, meaning an older AM radio, even FM radios, know that distance matters. That the closer you are to a broadcast station, the easier it is to find the signal on your tuner, the louder the signal is. And yet when a station begins to get farther and farther away, there comes a point at which if you're really good, you might be able to tune it and get some static, or if you have an amazing radio or a really good antenna, but otherwise you don't hear the broadcast station. You with me? So imagine that all these planets are like broadcast stations. And imagine that planets go retrograde when they get closer to Earth, which is what they do. We've already established that. You know, this looking, you know, here versus not as much, you know, movement there. So that planets go retrograde as they get closer to Earth than other times in their cycle. What that means is that a retrograde planet is going to be louder than a non-retrograde planet. Now, there are certainly other factors that play into this, what sign it's in, what house it's in, how it's aspected to other, planets, the sacred geometry that vibrates your chart. But just in broad strokes, when a planet gets closer to Earth, it goes retrograde, it gets louder. It also in the sky looks like it's going backwards, which means it's covering territory that it already covered going forward. So that when planets turn retrograde, they go like this. They go over, let's say the microphone is a point in your chart, and a planet will go over that point and it will conjoin it. Let's say Mercury conjoins your natal Saturn at whatever degree it's at, and then it turns retrograde. It goes over that exact same point again. I've been here before, but everything looks different. I'm seeing things from the other side. And then it turns and it goes direct the third and final time. And often things happen in 1, 2, 3. It's the old things happen in threes, 3 strikes and you're out, beyond baseball. And it's because often things happen in our lives based upon a direct motion, a retrograde motion, and a direct motion. The problem is that we think we should always be moving forward. And when planets turn retrograde, what they're doing is something very natural in nature. It's a period of latency. It's a period of integrating the growth that's occurred and stabilizing things so that when it goes direct the third and final time, you have the energy and the awareness and the perception to make the most of that transition. And most of us just get frustrated as hell when the planets go direct, we're making progress, and then things start falling apart. The planets turn retrograde, and it feels like we're going backwards, but if we're paying attention, it's just nature saying, you got some stuff, you're getting extra time to work on this. It's not on your schedule, it's on nature's schedule. And then when it goes direct again, things begin to fall into place if you haven't quit, given up, or gone crazy. Let's come back to the gone crazy point, because imagine you're a young woman living, let's make it be in some time and place interesting. Let's say it's in the mid-late 1400s in Firenze, in Florence, Italy, at the height of the Italian or Florentine Renaissance. And it's buzzing. It's like being in the United States, perhaps, in San Francisco in the mid 60s. I mean, it's just happening. And let's say you're a young woman and you're in a middle-class family. Let's say your father is a textile trader and has made a small fortune bringing stuff from the East and trading it to the Medicis and having created quite a bit of wealth. And let's say you have 2 older brothers, and they are both studying Greek and Latin and the arts because that's what young men did at that time. But you're a woman or a young woman or a maturing girl, and you're not allowed to read. You're not allowed to learn to read. You're not, it's just not allowed, even in a quote unquote blue or liberal or Medician household. You're still not allowed to, because that's reserved for men. Let's say that you have a Mercury retrograde that's very active in your chart. It would make you crazy, because you would want to be learning how to read and write, and you would see the cool stuff, and maybe you'd have parents that were cool enough that would allow you to do that. But we used to live in a one-dimensional flat world, and now we live in a world where we actually find our own unique places by magnifying certain energies. And if we have an overactive, loud radio station coming in, rather than being told, go to your room if you're going to ask those questions, or rather, let's say it's a retrograde Venus and it's very loud and you're very loving and passionate and you're told you can't do that because that's illegal, or you'll go to hell if you honor those energies because you shouldn't do that, go to your room. These retrograde planets historically have grown to be negative energies because they typically were suppressed out of us, or we repressed them. And I know many of you probably have heard me say this before, that suppression and repression are very different. If you know you're doing it, you're not repressing. Anyone who says, oh yeah, I repress that all the time, bullshit. You suppress it, because if you repress it, it's unconscious. Oh yeah, I do that unconsciously. No, if you do it unconsciously, you don't know you're doing it.
Yeah.
But this is the crazy magic of the last 100 years, as psychology has created this liminality between conscious and what was unconscious, which became subconscious, which is somewhere between conscious and unconscious. And it's kind of like a twilighty thing. And yet when we have retrograde planets, we actually, rather than going through life in denial and suppressing them, we actually can learn how to work with them. We can become, even if one is a woman or a man growing up, a boy growing up in a home where no one reads or writes, one can now learn those things and become a great poet, even because of a very loud Mercury or a very loud Venus or Mars or so on. So the point here is that with Mercury, Venus, and Mars all changing directions, really going back to around election day in the United States, back to late October, November, December, but now particularly January, February, and highlighted mostly in March, where there's so many planets that have been retrograde that are now moving direct, including Uranus and Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto, and those planets that have just turned direct, like Mars, and the planets that will just turn retrograde, like Venus tomorrow on March 1st, and Mercury, which is already slowing down to turn retrograde mid-month. These planets are all close to Earth. And if we looked at a chart, and I think we actually will, and then we'll call this part quits here. Let's see, can I bring this up, Sam? Can you do that, or should I? So we're looking here, and I'm not going to go in real depth here. What we're looking at actually is a chart for February 27th, and this is within, let's just do this minutes. This is a chart, I'm just backing this up to the exact moment of the new moon. For those of you who can actually read the tiny numbers on the screen, you can see that, there we go. So there at about 4:44 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, that the sun and the moon on February 27th were at 9 degrees of Pisces and 41 minutes. That was the Pisces new moon. And we can see that the sun, the moon, Saturn, Mercury, the north node of the moon, which we haven't talked about. I talked about it on the February forecast, which is on YouTube as of just a few hours ago for March. But the north node of the moon, which is lined up with Neptune, and Mercury is coming into it. The nodes of the moon are the places where the orbit of the moon going around the Earth intersects the orbit of the Earth going around the sun. It's almost like two frisbees or two planes intersecting in a straight line. And even though there's nothing there that we can see, the magic of of vibrations interfering or crossing other vibrations is what makes things that are solid appear solid. What appears solid to us does not appear solid to a cosmic ray or an X-ray. They're so high frequency that cosmic waves, gamma rays, will go right through the earth without even knowing there was anything solid there at all. Solidity occurs because there are frequencies of hundreds of, well, actually thousands of trillions of times a second that are cycling, bumping into one another, creating nodes. Node is just Latin for knot, K-N-O-T, like a cancer node or like a node from having a bruise. It's a lump. It's something that appears to be solid. It's a knot. Reality ties itself up in knots, and nodes in the Eastern, in the Vedic, in the Hindu astrology are considered to be ultimately important because they are what Hindus call Maya, which is the illusion that hides what's real. What's real? Everything that's not in the three-dimensional world, because that's just the interplay of interactions of these high-frequency ripples. So Neptune, the planet of imagination, illusion, dissolution of three-dimensional reality, has been lining up with the nodal axis, which is really the point where the eclipses occur when there is a full moon or new moon close to an eclipse. When there's a new moon or full moon close to a node, close to the nodal axis, that's when eclipses occur. And that's why eclipses are so radical in how they rattle, I can tell I'm getting to the end. They rattle reality. And with all the stuff that we're not getting anywhere with in March, we have two eclipses, both the full moon eclipse on the 13th and the new moon eclipse on the 28th, 29th, are both eclipses. So the full moon and new moon are eclipses. And so during all this period of time, we also have Neptune lined up with the node, the north node of the moon. And so we have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets and the north node of the moon, the nodal axis, all in Pisces. But if we move this ahead just a day at a time, we can see that the moon moves into Aries, then Mercury on the 3rd moves into Aries. And by the end of the month, we can see that we can see the moon going all the way around, because the moon goes around once a month. There's the sun moving into Aries on the 20th. And then we come around to the eclipse on the 29th, and we have the moon now back in Aries. And Venus is retrograded back into Pisces. It's lined up with Neptune. Mercury is retrograde, and it will back over Neptune and into Pisces by the 30th, when Neptune is in Aries. And the only reason why I wanted to run through this here rather quickly is so you could see this dance between the end and the beginning, between Aries and between Pisces and Aries. And if we moved this ahead a month at a time, we can see that there's more planets here by the end of April, because now Mercury and Venus are both moving direct and are out of Pisces into Aries. And then by the end of May, Saturn is now almost caught up with Neptune in Aries, but then they both turn retrograde, and Saturn backs into Pisces, then Neptune backs into Pisces. Can you see where I am here? And then they both turn direct. Neptune moves back into Aries, and then by next February, Saturn catches up to Neptune, and they line up exactly at 0 degrees of Aries. This is why this is such an extraordinary moment in time, because we can't tell where we are, we can't tell where we've been, and we can't tell where we're going, except it's important to be ultra hyper aware of what information you're taking in and where you're taking it in from. We have to acknowledge and understand that in this culture that we live in the technological social realms of the media in which we live, there's no such thing as accurate information. It's all what's the word in a museum when you put some curated. That's the word I was looking for. Our reality is curated. In fact, part of the craziness is that we don't realize that what we see individually on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Truth. So I don't care what media you're using, or on actual broadcast TV, whether it's CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Al Jazeera, Pravda, it doesn't matter. Reality is being curated, and whatever truth it is that you think you have is another curation. And that's a frightening thought, because so many of us, me included, believed that what I was seeing was true, and that what they were seeing was not true, that they were somehow aberrated. And the fact of the matter is that what we are all seeing is in fact curated. And so the only thing that we can do is pay attention to what news or information we're getting from where. And many years ago, I wouldn't say a friend, but someone I knew who signed every email he wrote with his name, Bill, blah, 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 blah. And underneath it would say, just another data point. Because every piece of information that we get is another data point, and reality is vibrational, and we can tune it just like a radio. And right now, the tuning is impossible to know what is coming through that is going to be ultimately what we define as reality. And for those of you who think that we can change the future but not change the past, I would only say, well, what did you think about the past when, as a kid, you grew up celebrating Columbus Day or Thanksgiving, or pick some other event that you then learned that, gee, this isn't the way it was at all. We don't know what it was. And people go, yeah, well, reality is still fixed. It's only our perception that changes. And that may be true, but the past only exists in the current perception. This is the power of now, the be here now, the Buddhist concept of the razor's edge of enlightenment is when there's no remembrance of the past and no anticipation of the future. It's that point, and we have to focus on understanding that point. And when it comes to making a decision and trying to decide what is real, it's easy. If there is 2 or 3 ways to look at something, pick the one that's the most compassionate. That's all I can say. The Dalai Lama, when asked, so what is your religion? He said, my religion is kindness, not intelligence. So that's it. Thank you all for, this indulgence. And we're going to take about a 10-minute break. And I'm going to say what I always say, and that is, even though today is a day where people all over the world are not buying anything from any corporations, today is a blackout day, for Amazon and Walmart and Facebook and Meta and everything else. It's not a blackout day to vote, because we don't only vote when we go to the polls. And of course, many of us vote at the polls and our votes are discounted, but we're not going there. But you vote economically. And it's not good enough to just not buy something at Amazon. We all have something that we can get for someone's birthday or some present for someone or ourselves. spend a few minutes, look around the store, and these events, as you know, I don't get paid. The money that you pay Soul Food to come here is really just based to just keep the damn place open after hours. And these kinds of community events are really important. So, get your last round of drinks because they'll close the bar while we're doing some charts. We'll take about a 10-minute, 15-minute break. I have papers here or little forms. If you've never had your chart done, here, fill out one of these. We'll pick out 3 names from a hat, and we'll do 3 charts when we come back in about 15 minutes. Also, if you're already on my mailing list, but you've never had your chart done, don't bother putting your email address on it. And also, if you don't want your chart done, but you're not on my email list, fill out one of those things and just put your name and your email address on it, and we'll get you on my email list. You will not be overwhelmed with too much marketing crap, but you will be notified, for example, a day or 2 before the next event here and so on. And I think, am I missing anything? Does anybody have anything to say? Questions, answers? I take answers over questions.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
That's it.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. Right. Right. It's the secret chord. Hallelujah. All right. Well, thank you all. And for those of you who have had enough, respect, get out of here, sneak out of here, buy something on the way out before you leave. And for the rest of you, we'll reconvene in about 10 or 15 minutes and we'll do some charts. You'll see how this stuff works in real time. Thank you all. All right. So these are the serious junkies. Got this whole group back here that I have my back to more than, that's not nice. Okay, are we on, Sam?
Yep.
All right, welcome back to everyone online. Let's get rid of the, are we good? I don't need to look there? We're good? All right, so we are now going to do 3 charts. And remember, this is, I always say that if you get chosen, it's not about you. You're being used. It's really about us. However, I will ask that if you are chosen, I mean, obviously, by virtue of putting your name there, you are allowing me or giving me permission to broadcast this. But I would also ask that you participate by actually talking with me if I talk with you. And yet I understand that you're here in front of a group of people that you don't know and potential people online. So I'm not asking anyone to disclose anything that they might disclose if they were in a real private consultation. However, because we're in this for us and not for you, it helps us if you are actually playing along and actually say, yep, that's true. No, that's not me at all, or whatever. That becomes helpful. So with no further ado, first person I have picked is Judy. And Judy, born April 19. Where are you, Judy? Judy. Okay. And Sam, I am online, yes?
Yep.
And is my screen sharing now?
Yeah, I try not to share it when you're putting in people's.
Oh, well, I'm only using first names here, so it really doesn't, it doesn't matter. Whoops. So the first person that we are looking at is Judy, and I will try to do this. There's Judy, and I always put an SF for soul food after this. And this is 4/19/44, 4/19/44. And the time is 10:01 p.m. 10:01 p.m. And that is in Long Beach, California, where I was just 2 weeks ago. I actually, where's Judy? Where did you live in Long Beach? What part? North or south? I lived down on Belmont Shores for a couple of years. Okay, inland a little bit. And okay, so we have Judy's chart. And Judy, what's your relationship with astrology, if any? Okay, so you've never had your chart done, or no? All right, so what we're looking at here is, let me just get rid of this. Okay. What we're looking at here is a map of where the planets were at the date and time and place where you were born. And all these symbols around the outer edge are the symbols for the various planets. For example, I can see that on April 19th, the sun, the symbol right here where my cursor's moving around, that's the symbol for the sun, was at 29 degrees, 59 minutes of Aries, which is very intriguing because there's 60 minutes in a degree, like there's 60 minutes in an hour, which means that had you been born just 1 or 2 minutes later, you would have been a Taurus rather than an Aries, which would lead me to believe that if you read books about signs, that you might identify as much or more with the Taurus with some aspects than with Aries. The primary difference in that when I look at your chart is I see that the sun is at the very end of Aries, and Mercury, which is how we think, is in the next sign Taurus. So regardless of whether you consider yourself a fiery, feisty, energetic Aries, or more of a steady kind of sense-based Taurus that is more determined about getting to where you get to. Aries are really good at starting things. Tauruses are really good at finishing them. And I imagine that you have influence from both of those things in your chart. And in a way, I would imagine that you think like a Taurus. You talk like a Taurus. Mercury in Taurus, there's a sense of when you say things, when you learn things, you want to know that it's real, but what you like, because your Venus is what we like, and Judy's Venus is in Aries, which would lead me to believe that what you like is more fiery, is more sudden, is more kind of like impulsive, that there's an impulsiveness to your value judgments, but when you learn something, it really has to be solid. I don't know if that makes any sense to you or not. And then we talked earlier about that whole Pisces thing, the dream, the illusion, the compassion of Pisces. And when you were born, your moon is in Pisces. And so there's a part of you that feels also that whole end of the spectrum, that Pisces stuff. But what's intriguing to me, two things are, and when we look at all these colored lines in the middle, they have to do with how each of the planets are getting along with other planets in the chart. And I'm going to here just get rid of some of the noise because I want to show you something here. And I want to go aspected points, and I want to take out, that didn't work the way I wanted it to, aspected points, and I want to go, I want to go the moon and Saturn and Venus and Mars. Okay. So what I've done is I've basically taken out a lot of the noise so I can just talk about the sacred geometry between these planets, because the moon in Pisces is the part of you that emotionally is connected to dreams, is connected to spirituality, or connected to feelings. And yet these red lines represent 90-degree angles, which is conflict or engagement. And what this shows me is that how you feel, that kind of smushy, I think of Pisces kind of as Angora fur. You know, it's just, it's soft. But Saturn is that planet of structure and reality. And in your chart, Saturn is in Gemini, which suggests to me that learning and reading and language has to be real for you. And that's said in a couple of different ways in your chart. And that red line between Saturn in Gemini and the moon in Pisces is kind of an ongoing internal dialogue that you have between the feeling that everything should just flow with everything and the need to have concrete words and evidence that this is the way something is. And I don't know whether there's a love or an interest of language or books or teaching, but those are some of the things that might make sense with respect to that. The other thing that stands out is that Venus and Mars are also very close to being 90 degrees or square. And Venus and Mars, we often think of in relationship to romance or sexuality. Venus is what we like, and Venus is the sign for feminine energy. whereas Mars is how we get it, and it's the sign of masculine energy. But in your chart, the Venus in Aries kind of says this is Venus in Mars's sign, Aries. So it's kind of like the what you like and what your values are. I come back to that impulsive and fiery part of you that has a real sense of the urgency, immediacy of what's going on in the moment and how you're reacting. And yet the Mars in Cancer basically says, yes, but I'm not going to necessarily show physically that energy outwardly, aggressively, assertively. Instead, I'm going to pull that energy in where I can care for it and nurture it. It's kind of more of a maternal nurturing energy than a kind of put on an army suit and go conquer a third world nation energy. And both of these are conflictive, both of these two pairs. But in astrology, in ancient astrology, conflicts like these would be considered to be, and this is a technical Hellenistic astrology word, would be considered to be an affliction. In modern psychology, these are considered to be dynamic energies that are motivational and initiate action or growth or engagement. So I don't know if those two patterns make sense to you at all. What kind of work did you do or have you done in life in general? I assume, yeah, no assumptions. Hospital administration. So caring, nurturing. And the Saturn in Gemini and that Mercury in Taurus would lead me to believe that in whatever kind of administration that you did, that your words, your communications, the languaging, the interaction things are the administrative end of that obviously had to do with some skills of yours of being able to, I'm doing this. If I say contractualize, I don't mean signing a contract. I mean crystallizing, making things real by your actions, but not necessarily pushing outward, but caring by giving structure through your language. Does that make sense at all? Yeah. Yeah. That was a mediocre. Yeah. I also imagine that I don't want to say that you're not optimistic, but I imagine that you have the ability of looking a lot more optimistic, outgoing. People probably don't realize how soft and smushy you are until they get to know you, because that Sagittarius rising is more like the outgoing optimism and kind of like, this is what we got to do. Here's where we're going, kind of the long-term kind of impact of what you do and where you go. The other interesting thing that I just noticed is that Chiron, which is something between a planet and an asteroid and a centaur is what scientists call them. But Chiron, which was discovered in 1977, is considered to be the wounded healer. And Chiron is the highest elevated planet in your chart, which would indicate a connection to the healing arts or sciences or work, because Chiron, as a centaur, half animal, half horse, half human, was also a teacher. And Chiron was a healer. Chiron taught Asclepius the healing arts and taught Hercules the martial arts. And with Chiron so high in your chart, I can see how that might have been or is an important part. Often Chiron shows how our individual wounds become part of why it is that we do what we do to help or heal others. Make any sense?
Yes, because I used to get people's problems at the hospital and saw them. Give them the answers.
And for those of you online, Judy said yes. Okay, let's go back to. Yeah. The other thing that I think would be interesting to note is that your moon in Pisces over the last year or so has been actually over the last several years. As remember, I said all these planets have been moving through Pisces early on, and right now, actually, Saturn moving through Pisces is coming closer and closer to your moon, which would lead me to believe, and I'm going to change the view here just for a quick moment before we go on. And now we're looking at a chart where your planets are still in the middle. All the lines are gone. But the planets around the outside are where the planets are today. And you can see that Saturn is close to where the moon was when you were born. And Saturn takes about 30 years to go around once. And this would indicate to me that over the next weeks, that there may be some important transition that's more than just another day, another week, another month, that may have to do with the ending of something or a feeling of, often when Saturn is lining up with our moon, and again, this has been pushing for the last months, but really actually becomes exact. I'm going to give you close to the day when it's exact, and you can send me an email, or next month if you appear here, let us know what is it that happened around March, let's say the last week of March. If there's something already in your sites that have anything to do with a change on the home front or some dynamic, either in relationship or work or what you do in your daily life. Often when Saturn lines up with the moon, because Saturn is that crystallization, it is that the pressure to make things real. I would imagine that there's some sort of critical decision. I say critical, I don't mean life, death. I mean, but something that's an important decision that's kind of on your plate. I would be surprised if it's not there already, having to make some decision about yes, no, do it, don't do it, let it go, hang in there. Maybe you've already made those decisions, but I think that this is something that's playing out and playing through now. And come on. Come on. You are moving? Maybe. Yeah, that. Well, the thing about Saturn transitions, again, these are crossroads in time. They're like intersections. And it doesn't say that we are moving. What it says is that there's pressures why we may not. I look at Saturn lining up with the moon. This is going to be a horrible, no, it's not going to be horrible. Depending upon how squeamish you are, it's like a snake outgrowing its skin. Because from the outside, we go, oh, isn't that cool? That snake it outgrows its skin, it has new skin. It sheds it. For the snake, it's a very different thing because it's grown and it's contained by a constriction, and it can't breathe. It can't take a deep breath. It can't express its feelings, what it means for us humans. I mean, not that necessarily always, but it's this feeling like if I do something, it could rip the skin and the entire structure that holds me together will fall apart. And Saturn on the moon says, well, that's okay. And yes, when that happens, then you might feel very raw and vulnerable because the same old protective skin that has hardened and has turned into rhino skin, all of a sudden you got baby butt skin everywhere. And so there's this feeling of like vulnerability. And so oftentimes when that Saturn lines up with the moon, we feel like we need to move or make a change, but we don't, because we're afraid that if we do, it's just changing too much too fast kind of a thing. And yet it's still the process of realizing that you're at this intersection, and that whatever you do over the next weeks or month or so will likely pass, and what you do or don't do will become a thing of the past. Make sense?
What's the degree of the nodal axis in Pluto?
Thank you for that. Because I got so, this is what happens often when you do charts like this, is you notice one thing and then you don't notice something else. So thank you for that. The nodal axis in Judy's chart is at about 2.5 degrees of Aquarius to Leo, which means that Pluto right now is going forth and back and forth over that point, which is another evolutionary indication that it's kind of like that vortex in time that shoots and ladders kind of a thing that indicates, aside from whether you move or don't move, that this is an evolutionary point in your life where there is a transformation of your life or your being going on. And that's just another, it's a deep level of change. And it's just, you know, again, in a private consultation, we'd probably have a more of a discussion over this, but it would indicate to me just that this is a very dynamic point in your life with critical or crucial, important, significant decisions. We good? Do you guys know each other? I'm together sometimes. Sometimes not.
She's the reason.
Aw, got it.
Yeah, my mom.
Okay, well, good enough. All right, thank you, Judy. Next, whoa, I guess we're on the J's. We got Jackie. June 7th? Right, Jackie. Oh, this is going to be a problem. Jackie, would you mind like just sitting over there so I can not have my back to you as we're talking? This is for me, not for you. Thank you. All right, and we go Jackie. June 7th, 88. Oh, we're in the double numbers, 44 to 88. June 7th, 88. 10:38 a.m. 10:38 a.m. And this is in the land of Oak Land, California. And sorry about that. And Jackie, your relationship with astrology, if any? Have you ever had your chart done? Never?
Like 10 years ago, but I don't remember.
You don't remember it. So first of all, just notice the difference in patterns. I mean, every chart is different, and the patterns themselves say something about a chart. Judy has a lot more, I would say noise, but that sounds negative, and it's not negative at all. But there's a lot more stuff going on, whereas Jackie has less stuff going on, but it's more wired loudly. There's no good or bad to any of these things. But when I look at Jackie's chart, what I see is, first of all, I see a Gemini sun with a bunch of planets in Gemini. And in fact, Mercury and Venus, Mercury, how you talk, how you listen, how you communicate, Venus, what you like, what you're attracted to, your sense of values, and Chiron, the wounded healer, the teacher, all in Gemini with the sun, which would lead me to make the first assumption that learning and or teaching and or talking and or interacting is important for you. And we might say, well, isn't it for everyone? But for you, there's something here that's wired on a higher frequency. And you have Leo rising, and Leo often is considered to be the most dramatic, like a lion roaring. There's this whole sense of Leo as being on stage. There's people with strong Leo energy, like Madonna, like Mick Jagger, like Paul McCartney just come to mind. They're look at me, and they're actors in a way. But that's a male Leo, even though it might be in a female like Madonna, because in the lion community, the lionesses are very different than the lions, because the lions spend most of their adult lives roaring and boasting and kind of negotiating who's top cat. Because in the lion community, the alpha cat doesn't get the alpha female. The alpha lion gets all the females in the local tribes. And so there's a lot at stake. Meanwhile, the lioness doesn't have any time for that bullshit, like going out and playing football and drinking beer and fighting with the other guys and rolling around having fun, but really all about who's on top. Meanwhile, the lionesses are doing the hunting, raising the kids, doing the books, taking out the trash, and looking at the boys going, yeah, right. And I think it's important to remember that astrology as we get it was largely written by guys for guys. And so you get this incredible difference in a Leo rising. Now, for all I know, you may be an actress of some sorts, but I'm just giving you the out of just saying, no, the real Leo rising, the higher, the yin expression rather than the yang expression is just intention and taking care of business. So what do you do?
I work in people operations. So
In
people operations.
people operations,
So I work as a business partner in HR space.
HR. So there is a bit of public interaction within your community. But again, with all that Gemini, I would imagine a lot of it's what I call chitter chatter. I mean, not that it's unimportant, but it's that back and forth information, that sending and receiving of information, and the heightened level of communication that enables you to have what I call lots of plates on sticks spinning. That may be very different for someone else. But here's an interesting thing, and that is, like Judy, you have the moon in Pisces kind of at the same place. I mean, there's Judy's moon at 23 degrees, 30 minutes of Pisces. Your moon is at 23 degrees and 20 minutes. That's 23 1/3 of a degree of Pisces, which would lead me to say that whatever I just said about Judy's life transitions and changes, for you, it impacts you very differently because your chart's very different, but there is something about that pressure for constriction, and how are you going to deal with this kind of pressures that are on you and things that need to be decided, or things that will unfold, I think, in the weeks or month ahead. I don't know, is there anything cooking in your life that could be that possibly?
Well, I'm looking to do a career transition, so maybe.
So, yeah, I mean, a career transition could be something like that. I would also imagine, because you have Mars also in Pisces, and it's harmonized, that big, thick blue line, it's 1/3 of a circle down to Pluto. I imagine that you work with what I would call a deep reserve of energy in the bank. That somehow you have places where you can bring up deep stuff I look at a chart like yours and I'd say, I'd rather have you on my side than on their side. Because I imagine when you're motivated, and I didn't mean this to be funny, although I imagine that when you are motivated with a goal in mind, that there's a part of you that is a bit unstoppable, even though you can seem easygoing, you can seem light in your interactions, that you're playing with what I would call hidden money in the bank. But I don't mean money here, more energetic reserve that allows you to kind of accomplish or do more than, it's like your superpower. Do you relate to that at all? Definitely, for those people online who can't hear our not so loud Leo rising Jackie. The one other thing I want to mention here is that when you were born, Saturn and Uranus were aligned. Now, we didn't talk much about Uranus tonight, although we will in the months ahead, because Uranus, like all the other outer planets, this is part of the craziness of 2025 in general, but Uranus is also changing signs. And for those of you who have been coming here regularly, you know that Pluto and Neptune and Uranus and Saturn are all changing signs around this point in time, and it's unusual for that all to happen, I want to say at the same moment, but here a moment is 2 or 3 years long. You were born with Saturn and Uranus lined up, meaning that Saturn, the planet of contraction, of authority, of being real, having just moved into Capricorn where it's at home, I would imagine again that as an administrator, that you hold your weight, that you can hold the position. But you have Uranus lined up with Saturn, and Uranus is the planet of shock, surprise, sudden change, explosion, and it's almost like Saturn says, "I am authority," and Uranus says, "I hate authority," right at the exact same time, same place. And for those of you online, let the record show that the witness has just broken into what I call the laugh of recognition. No, but there's that sense of the iconoclast who absolutely disrespects authority unless it's their own or an authority that they agree with, and then they can shake, rattle, and roll. But there's that kind of weird thing. It's almost like Uranus is an irrepressible urge for anything. I mean, it can be a personal, physical urge to go to the bathroom. I don't care what it is. It can be the urge of an earthquake ready to happen, or a volcano ready to blow. That's Uranus. Saturn is the containment of holding things in their place. And so it's like, even with this deep energetic reserve that I talked about, there's a part of you that is always sitting on, I would recommend, if you were my client, that not to hold dynamite and the fuse in the same pocket, to just keep them separated, because when they get close together, and I would imagine there are times in your life when the pressure just built up so much that if you didn't light the fuse, someone in your reality exploded it for you and everything changed. And I don't know if you can relate to events like that in your life, but if you do, just be aware that not everyone else here has that happen in their individual lives.
I will say that has happened with someone else's globe.
In which case, again, if you were my client, I would encourage you to light more sticks of dynamite rather than having other people, this is going to sound all wrong, in your pockets lighting them for you. I didn't mean it like that at all. But there's that sense of things, when things happen around you, it's often because you're not being as unique and as different and as eccentric and iconoclastic as you might be. Now, I know there's a balance, because too much of that, our lives can fall apart. So that's just some food for thought. I also would imagine, though, that the last year or so might have had high levels of frustration because Saturn moving through Pisces also lined up with your Mars. And it's almost like you've been through this period of time, maybe more like about a year ago, but where it's like every time you hit the gas, it's like everyone else hits the brake for you. Or every time you hit the brake, somehow the gas goes down. It's this hot, uneven kind of frustration of not being able to get the right rhythm that sometimes at other times in your life you have.
Yes, I would say
Yes. All right.
that is correct.
Enough there. Thank you for sharing. All right. Third and final. Steve, it's your lucky day. Where's Steve? He left. Steve, are you here? All right, we'll pick another one. Steve, it's not your lucky day. Your astrologer screwed up. Whose lucky day is it? Mishka. Where'd you go? You were here also. She was sitting over here. All right. Well, that's your punish. That's your, huh? She went with Steve. Maybe. Angie. All right. Angie, what's your deal with astrology? I seem to ask everybody that.
Get my feet wet.
And is the water warm or cold? All right, let's do this. ANGIE, Angie, SF for soul food. And you're a September 2378. 9/23/78. I'm sorry, say again?
Oh, sorry.
September, right? That would be, wait a minute, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. But sept should be 7 if it wasn't for Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar, both who decided to gain immortality by naming a month after themselves. Otherwise, it would be, okay, September. All right. And Knoxville. So there's a great Instagram thing of this guy who, about the one day a year when we should all pronounce every silent letter. Knoxville. Well, that's not in the right place. Let's do this again. I'm not sure what I did there. All right, let's try this one more time. Sorry about that, guys. Angie, and that's 9/23/78. See, you messed me up. 9/23/78. And that's at 7:23 a.m. And now we go Knoxville, and that's a TN, and that's EDT and latitude, longitude. And again, a different pattern. 0 degrees of Libra. You were born just moments. It's interesting. We've had like 2 people that were highly cuspal. There's a good word. And you definitely, unquestionably, are Libra, not Virgo. However, you have Saturn and Mercury and the North Node in Virgo, and probably Virgo rising, although again, that's so close, it's at 29 degrees of Virgo. But I imagine that for a Libra, there's a very strong analytical and effective and efficient side of you that is more interested in the analysis of information so that you can make use of it. Although as a Libra with Pluto also in Libra, there certainly, it's likely that there, are also artistic, tendencies and or pieces in your life. And yet as a Libra, the key or ruling planet, the planet that is at home in Libra, is Venus. And so we look at Venus in your chart and we get another whole level of flavor, because your Venus and your Mars and your Uranus are all in Scorpio. And that's a whole different flavor. Stalking is Scorpio's way of saying, I love you. There is not really, but it sounds good. I often say that being loved by someone with a lot of Scorpio energy in their chart is the most magnificent thing in the universe, until the part where they kill you. Scorpio is really, Scorpio is not, it's one of the few signs, there's 3 or 4 signs that are just not understood. They're misunderstood. And Scorpio certainly is intense, but it's intense because it's passionate, because it's the nighttime Mars, and Mars in the daytime is engaging and fighting, and in the night it's basically making love, and it's physically engaged in its feelings. And so the nighttime Scorpio, which is also in modern astrology related to Pluto, is about the underworld, the unconscious, the hidden. And Scorpio gains its power not by what it says, not by what it does, but by what it doesn't say. That's the why Scorpio's way of saying I love you is stalking. Not really, but there's this kind of attraction and scorpionic energy to things that are hidden from other people. And so Scorpios do tend to be deep and intense. And often they're the sign that when someone says I'm a Scorpio, people go, oh, because those, if you're a Scorpio and people do that, don't feel like you're being judged. Feel instead like that's someone you don't want to hang out with, because they'll never get it, because there are some people who can go there. And if you don't know where there is, then you miss what I'm talking about. And then there are people who have gotten close to there and go, I'm never going there again. And then there are people who have gone there and say, I'm not that, no. And then there are people who really try to go there because that's where the magic happens. That's where the merging happens. That's where the instead of Neptune dissolving the place between you and me, this is the place where 2 people can actually go to some place where egos are no longer in control, and that magic transformation takes over. And I would take this one step further in your chart, because in Scorpio, you have Venus lined up with Uranus. Again, Uranus being the planet of innovation, shock, surprise, breaking the rules. And Venus is the planet of what we like. And so this tells me, or it suggests to me, that you like things that other people think are strange. And in fact, with Venus conjunct Uranus, there's a sense of being in love with those things which are eccentric, out of the box, other than normal. And I just would like to just go on record of saying that normal is really only a choice on the dryer dial. That normalcy as a state of existence is highly overrated. But this tells me that your tastes in art, in music, in love are intense, scorpionic, and are not necessarily the status quo of quote unquote those who are normal, end quote. Nevertheless, as a Libra, you have no problem looking like you're normal. I would say one other thing about your chart, and that is the square, the 90-degree angle between Jupiter and Mars would suggest to me that there can be issues of excess in your life, whether it's too much of anything. You can pick whatever it is, and you don't have to tell us. But there's this idea of being able to make things into something more than they are, which can be a very positive trait because it gives you the ability to see potential in things and then get charged up physically about making something happen. On the other hand, those things can often then, like a balloon that you blow up, you can blow up so much that the balloon pops. And so I think it's just a dance in some way with excess, with big ideas, with the idea of taking on more than you can do, more than you can deal with. And then lastly, I would mention your Gemini moon at the top of the chart. Again, that Gemini is the connecting the dots. It's the curious. The idea of that Gemini moon would suggest to me that you always have more thoughts going on in your head than the other three people in the room together. That it's noisy in there, and that other people, and because of all the scorpionic energy, other people may not know how noisy it is in there. And again, I'm not saying noisy as bad. I'm saying that you have a mind that can connect things that other people can't connect. That it's as a kid, that game of dots where you connected things to make squares. Don't play that with Angie because she'll win. Because that's what she does, is she connects dots. She moves through life in her mind, making those connections. And with the sun in Libra, she makes them look good. What do you do? Who the hell are you?
I'm an analyst for the.
Can you analyze us? And will you have the data that you need next month? I meant from the government.
Oh.
What area? What?
I'm in the Army, and I do resource analysis.
So interesting, because in a way the Libra part of you is it's the relationship. It's everything has two sides, and other Libra suns, risings, whatever in here. The biggest misconception about Libra is they can't make up their mind. That is such bullshit. No, they've made up their mind. They just have two ways of seeing things that are both. Librans are not indecisive. They're ambivalent. We say ambivalent. And it's another word that thinks, oh, if you're ambivalent, you don't care. No, that's not true. If you're ambivalent, you have two connections. A valence is an overlapping. And Librans basically have made up their mind, and they can see this and that. And they become experts at strategizing. They become experts, at games like chess and what I would call martial arts, because there's that sense of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, 5-star general, probably was more at home on a golf course than fighting with a sword or a gun. But as a strategist, that's what got him to be, the commander of the Allied armies in World War II. And so in some ways, that Saturn in Virgo and the Mercury in Virgo, the North Node in Virgo, and the Virgo rising is all part of that, energy, but it comes through the sun in Libra, which is the part that shines out there for the real world, that shows the diplomat, the balancing, the in-between person. So that's it. How'd we do? Great is good. Great is better than good. And with that, I'm going to, Sam, can you unshare my screen, or do I have to do that?
I can do it.
Yay. And I'd like to, while we're still online, thank both Sam and Gail for managing all this behind the scenes. Appreciate you guys. And just as a matter of record, the next time we will meet here will be on the first Friday night rather than the last Friday night, the first Friday night of April, which will be April 4th. My birthday is on April 6th, so that'll be my birthday party night. And so we'll have some form of self-indulgent celebration because that's what we Aries do. And perfect. And that's it. Thank you all for sticking around. And I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate you guys online. Anybody have, Sam, do you have an idea of what our numbers were online? How'd we do?
We got to 679. We're currently at 410.
All right. Thank you all for sticking around and being the addicts that I need to support my lifestyle. No, appreciate all of you. And I will, and don't forget my monthly is online now, and youtube.com/@RickLevine will get you there. And I'll see some of you incurables next month. And thank you all for your support. And be kind. Be kind above everything else. Be aware, pay attention to what you're paying attention to, because there's a lot of dumb shit out there right now. And again, it goes beyond what your personal beliefs are, or whether you agree with me on this issue or that issue, or the majority of people or the people in control. I don't care what side of whatever issue you're on, you still don't know what's going on, and neither do I. And we're all in this together. Be kind. Thank you all. And by the way, a few of us after these go over to Matt.